What Yogendra Singh writes in this particular chapter called Ideology, Theory and Methods in Indian Sociology will be just reviewing what he has said in his writings. Yogendra Singh is considered to be a tough scholar to understand. If you look at this particular chapter 3, where he talks about ideology, theory and methods in Indian sociology, what he writes in the very beginning, he says that if you review the growth of Indian sociology from dominant theoretical perspectives, you'll find certain theoretical innovations, you'll find changes in methodology and technique, and also you'll find its interaction with other social sciences. What he's trying to argue, that if you want to look at the growth of sociology in India, there are three important aspects you have to keep in mind. One, the theoretical innovations. That means theoretically what are the innovations which has taken place. Second, what are the methodological changes or methodology and techniques sociologists use, and how does this growth of sociology has the impact other social sciences or being influenced by other social sciences. So to examining growth of sociology in India, you have to have three things in mind: theoretical innovations, then methodological techniques and tools, and the newness in methodological techniques and tools. Third, how does this sociology as a discipline is being influenced or influencing other social sciences. So these are the three important points you have to keep in mind while examining the growth of sociology in India. If you look at the initial phase of Indian sociology, where you can see that there was a debate for universalization of the discipline during 1952 to 77. So during 1952 to 77, there was a demand we should propose or we should develop such a discipline which needs to be universalized in nature. What does it mean, universalization of sociology? Or such a discipline which has a universal appeal. That means when you talk about universalization of the discipline, it means when you say that sociology is science, so science doesn't vary according to space and time, because science has a universal appeal. For example, if 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen you mix here in BBAU, or you mix in somewhere else in New York, so the result will be same. So therefore, it's a universalization of science, we can say. That means if you have a particular formula, this formula has universal appeal. So likewise, sociology should be such a discipline which should have a universalized appeal, in the sense we should have follow such methods and techniques to study society which is applicable across the globe. So therefore, universalization of the discipline. Specifically, Radhakamal Mukherjee is trying to talk about that we should develop such sociology which should be universalized in nature. But the period what Yogendra Singh is trying to refer is 1952 to 77. So during this particular period, there was a demand to make sociology as a universalization of the discipline during this period. But when you talk about universalization of the discipline, there is one reference here, and that reference is about sociology of knowledge, which has been referred by Yogendra Singh in his writing 1973, Mukherjee in 1965, Joshi in 1975. They all try to talk about sociology of knowledge in the context of history. What does it mean, sociology of knowledge in the context of history? You may be thinking that, sir, you were talking about universalization of sociology as a discipline, but now you are entering into sociology of knowledge. Sociology of knowledge, first of all, you need to understand what is knowledge and how knowledge is created. All the time I always argue that knowledge, how knowledge is produced. Knowledge is always for further improvement. Knowledge is always anti-established. Knowledge is always strengthened or to complement the findings with other findings. I think knowledge is all about this. Think about the kind of technology you have today. So what I'm trying to say, it make addition to it. Now, if you refer to mobile which you used to have in 1990 for that matter, 92, 93, 94, that time, pager and all that thing was there at that time. But look at today. So one device with one kind of features, but now it has added with many features. Clear? But the basic philosophy or the basic principles of science is same, but there is an addition to it. So knowledge is always tries to add to the existing domain of knowledge or existing framework of understanding society. So therefore, knowledge always add to the existing domain of knowledge. Number one, it alters or it gives a new pronunciation to the findings. So therefore, and the third thing what I've said, all knowledge is always anti-established. That means what is being established, you try to alter it. So therefore, knowledge is considered to be anti-established, means it brings many kind of newness, innovativeness. So in that particular context, when you try to examine what is called sociology of knowledge, sociology of knowledge has to be contextualized in the context of history. That means over a period of time, how the knowledge has been constructed, or how the knowledge has been getting transformed, how the changes which has taken place. So therefore, knowledge has to be understood in the context of history. Now, apart from this example what I have given about technology, think about India, what I talked about earlier, the colonialism and its impact on intellectuals, the cultural traditions in India has certain manifestations in the form of theoretical formulations, ideological development and professional evaluation. What I'm trying to argue, I'm just trying to say, when you try to talk about sociology of knowledge, the knowledge has to be contextualized in the context of history. So in this context, when you look at India or the formation of knowledge in India, it has to be understood in the context of colonialism. And colonialism has an impact on Indian intellectuals, and colonialism has an impact on Indian tradition and culture. Colonialism has an impact on our way of life. So therefore, the knowledge discourse in India has to be understood in the context of history, means the colonial history. So this colonial history has given us a cognitive framework to understand society. How you can say that the colonialism has given us a cognitive framework to understand society? Cognitive framework in the sense, as I have said earlier, that the Britishers, they tried to rule over India, but they tried to study India also. There are many writers, those who were engaged, specifically sociologists and anthropologists, to study India, Indian people, Indian tradition and culture, and these studies were helpful to the British Raj to rule over India. So that was the tradition, cognitive framework. That's what I'm trying to say. The cognitive framework started with their studies. Later on, Indian scholars have taken up. So the point I'm trying to say, that if you talk about sociology of knowledge, it has to be understood in the context of history, and it has to be understood in the context of colonialism, and it has to be understood that how colonialism has impacted Indian intellectuals, how colonialism has impacted Indian tradition and culture, and how under this historic backdrop there are theoretical, ideological and professional evaluation which has emerged. So therefore, if you want to study Indian society, so you have to study in the context of history, in the context of colonialism. So the cognitive and paradigmatic tension of Indian sociology during 1953 to 77 has a deep imprint of socio-historical forces which released during the freedom struggle. Now I'm coming to the second point. The second point, what I'm trying to say, the cognitive framework which was given by the colonial rulers, and that cognitive framework, and that has given a kind of paradigmic tension in Indian society. And during this particular period, what Yogendra Singh is trying to classify, that is called the period of 1953 to 77. Let me contextualize this, what happened during this particular period called 1953 to 77. Of course, the same framework which he has talked about little earlier, 1952 to 77. So it's the same framework, 52 to 77 or 53 to 77. Actually, what happened in 1952 or 53 onwards? You know, as I've said, the community development program has started in 1951. India adopted its constitutions during that time, and just India got freed from British Raj. But the legacy of this British Raj, or the kind of intellectual and cognitive framework which were provided by the British Raj, I think that all given a framework or that provides a kind of socio-historical forces which were there during freedom struggle, that shaped Indian intellectuals and their understanding about society. I think I have said about it earlier also. Like if you look at freedom struggle, I think freedom struggle arose against British Raj. Indirectly, this has culminated into the feeling of nationalism. So the feeling of nationalism emerged during freedom struggle, and the freedom struggle was a kind of struggle against the British Raj. But indirectly, this struggle has emerged as a background to develop Indian nationalism. And also, not only Indian nationalism, but also it has provided a cognitive framework to Indian scholars and Indian thinkers to think about and write about Indian society. You know, if you refer to these during this particular period, the first 2 decades after independence, you will find there are several orientations exist in Indian sociology during that time. The orientations were about descriptive and evolutionary studies of castes, social customs, land system and village community, and their comparison with similar institutions in the West. What I am trying to argue here, that if you look at the first 2 decades after independence, maybe that is 52, 53 to 77, that is the particular period he is trying to say, you can find that Indian sociologists try to talk about study in a descriptive manner. Studying in a descriptive manner, studying caste, studying Indian tradition, studying folklores, land system, village community, all were studied in a descriptive framework during that particular period, meaning thereby, by studying these things in a descriptive manner, provides us a framework to understand Indian society. So therefore, the focus was in a descriptive manner or descriptive model to understand society, which were there during first 2 decades after independence. You know, how does it conceptualized by Yogendra Singh? What Yogendra Singh writes in this particular context? He writes, its most important meta-theoretic contribution was in engendering an ethno-sociological awareness about Indian sociology, which has continued to persist. What does it means? Ethno-sociological awareness. Ethno-sociological awareness about Indian sociology. You know, ethno-sociological awareness, this is the point what he is trying to say. So ethno-sociological awareness means, ethno means about people, no? Ethno-sociological awareness about Indian sociology. There is something called Indian sociology which exists. Such kind of awareness has emerged. What does it mean? That there is something called sociology as an academic discipline which exists, that provides a framework to understand the ethno-sociological awareness. You know, actually, it is a philosophical note what Yogendra Singh is trying to argue, that ethno-sociological awareness about Indian sociology, which has continued to persist even today. So, ethno-sociological awareness means people or intellectuals are somehow, by referring to the descriptive studies about caste, about land system, about village community, I think that has made its impact in such a manner that in intellectual traditions people are able to realize the importance of a discipline called sociology. So the importance of the discipline called sociology, I think that is called ethno-sociological awareness of Indian sociology. That means something called Indian sociology which has emerged out of such discourses. Means on the basis of these studies, people or intellectuals or public at large would be able to realize there is something called a new discipline which has emerged. You know, when you say that ethno-sociological awareness, it refers to that there is something, there is some way to look at society, there is a way to study society. I think that kind of notion which has emerged. Of course, if you refer to the development of sociology in India, which was started in Bombay, Peter Geddes was the founding chairman of Bombay School, and later on Lucknow School which has emerged. The sociology was with economics, civics and political science. So later on a discipline emerged. But the point I'm trying to say, during that 20 years, that kind of ethno-sociological awareness has emerged. That means this awareness still persists and guides us to work in a particular manner. You know, if you refer to this ethno-sociological awareness about Indian sociology, and that takes us towards the quest for universalization of sociological categories. You know, Indian scholars, specifically Radhakumar Mukherjee, he advocates universalization of sociology. That means we should develop sociology in such a manner it can be, or it should have an universal appeal, or it should be universally accepted. But this ethno-sociological awareness about Indian sociology also works in such directions to make universalization of sociological categories. The universalization of sociological categories in the sense that we study society in such a manner by which the concepts and categories what we use should have a universal appeal. Take it in a simple framework. Now, when you say that sociology is science, how we say that sociology is science? Science is universal. I think you don't have any doubt about it. Science is not universal. Science is universal. In that particular context, we say that sociology is science. If you refer to the initial arguments developed by Auguste Comte and Herbert Spencer to Emile Durkheim and other founding fathers of Indian sociology, they all were trying to make sociology as science. Their effort was to make sociology as science, and I think if you agree with this particular argument, then it takes towards a universalization of the discipline called sociology. When you say that sociology is science, it has its own methods, it has its own tools, it has its own concepts and conceptual categories. So if you use all these things, then you can say sociology is science. So likewise, Indian sociologists also trying to argue that society must be studied in such a manner which should have a universal appeal, or which should have universal acceptance. That means across the globe, the concept what we use should be accepted or should not be questioned. I think so. The universalization of sociological categories, category in the sense the way sociologists try to study society, or it should have a universal acceptance. So therefore, if you take this framework, these framework are specific cognitive style marked by mode of appreciation or reflexivity in observation and comparison of structures of social relationship and its ideas. What the second argument I am trying to say? When you say that sociology is science, science means it has its own techniques, it has its own methods, it has its own way to study society. On the basis of that, you develop concept and conceptual frameworks. So I think that is called, which is marked by the appreciative aspect or the reflexivity of it. That means when you adopt this framework, you adopt a kind of techniques, you adopt a kind of formulas to study society, you adopt a kind of concepts. I think all are called cognitive style. Cognitive style in the sense it provides you a framework, it provides you a guidelines, cognitive guidelines to look at society. You can't go beyond it. No, I most of the time say to my students that if you want to do research, you have to follow the system or you have to follow the procedures. You cannot be so innovative. You must be innovative, but the doing social research has a framework. That is called the cognitive style. So you must follow the cognitive style which is given by the founding fathers or the sociologists to whom you refer. I think following that cognitive style itself is called universalization of the discipline. You can't do research the way you want. No, you cannot do like this. What does it mean if I say this, that you can't do research the way you want? I mean to say that you are not a journalist and you are a student of sociology, so you have to follow the cognitive style and framework provided by the sociologist or by the founding fathers. That will help you to make your research. I think that is called cognitive style. And when you talk following this cognitive style, you need to be reflective in observations and in comparison. You know, Emile Durkheim has given a methodology to study society. That is a comparative method. Why he has given this comparative method? And I think he found that this is the easiest way to study society. So comparison helps you to find a conclusion on the basis of such comparison. So comparative method is a tool to find out the difference or the similarities or find out the newness in the society what you are going to study or what the society you are studying. So comparison is a kind of categories, is a kind of cognitive style which were given by Emile Durkheim to understand society. I think that takes us towards universalization of the discipline. But secondly, reflexivity. The reflectivity in observations and comparison. So while making the comparison, you need to be reflective. What is called reflective? Why to reflect? Again, these questions I have, and how to reflect. Now, if I ask you to reflect on your own studies, where to start the reflections? I think reflection starts with re-examining or examining what you are doing. If you try to, I suggest you to, you reflect on yourself. That means you try to look at you, what I am doing, what I, since last 2 months, 3 months, what I am doing, what kind of work I am engaged in, how much time I am spending for what. I think that called reflectivity. So likewise, when you study a kind of social phenomena or when you try to study the society, you also try to be reflective about why I am interested to study the society. What are the aspects on which I can study? What are the aspects others have studied on this particular subject? So reflectivity or reflective categories is very important. And while you do observational studies or while you adopt observational technique or comparison studies, specifically structure or social relationship or any ideas, you must try to be reflective in your analysis. Reflective in the sense you must address the questions what you are interested to study. Actually, reflectivity means, in a very simple sense, you can say that you must try to put certain questions, what I have said you earlier, what questions, how questions, why questions, what it should be and what it ought to be. So if you ask these questions, I think that will take you towards reflectivity. And I think these are the standard procedures or these are the standard cognitive styles which a sociology student must know or any student who is pursuing science must know. So therefore, that will take us or that will take the discipline towards universalization of the discipline or acceptance of the discipline at universal level. I think that's all for today.